we are going to a
cold podcast.
Yes, which is confusing because it seems like temperature.
But it's a cold case. It's cold cases, right?
Yeah.
Is it
just one in particular?
Case?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we? Yeah, the cold podcast about the disappearance of. Now I'm gonna forget her name.
Susan Powell.
Susan Powell. Yeah. So we're gonna see the live version at the Eccles, one of the coolest places on earth. Yes, I'm so excited. I'm obsessed with this podcast. That's why I forgot the name. I have good memory. Of course, I grabbed an umbrella in a hurry and ended up with Cosette's. Goodbye. Cosette's ladybug umbrella with wings. But it matches.
Eyeballs.
Oh, is it eyeballs? Is it?
Probably wings.
Oh, yeah, eyeballs. That's how our relationship works.
For coming tonight. This is something that I never expected to be doing. I don't think KSL, the company that I work for, had any concept when we created the Cold Podcast that it would end up having the impact that it has had. And that so many people would identify anew with the story of Susan Powell. And it means the world to me personally, that all of you would take the time, that you would spend the money to come here tonight. Among her own family who wanted to be here, but for various reasons could not. I want to extend a personal thanks to all of them for having the willingness to support myself, KSL, Cold, and to continue to keep Susan's memory alive by being here. So thank you. I am super uncomfortable being on stage. I really don't even like being on television. I come from radio. This is not my comfort level. So if I shake a little bit tonight, if I mess up a cue here or there, please just bear with me. Why are we here? You know, tonight is not about me. The reason we are here is because of Susan. And it's because of Charlie, and it's because of Braden. 3 people who I never got to meet, but who I feel like I have come to know through my work researching this case. That was a difficult job. As you were coming in tonight, you might have noticed the soundtrack playing in the theater was country music. I don't like country music. But what I learned about Susan is that she did. She liked alternative music when she was a teenager, and she wrote later on in life that she reached a point where that kind of aggressive style no longer fit. And she liked listening to church hymns and to country music. And I thought it would be appropriate to share that piece of her life. I learned recently that Susan, when she was in high school, she was a great student. She graduated with practically a 3.9 GPA. She was smart. And she worked really hard, especially when it came to providing for her boys. I'm the kind of person who likes to take things apart. I like to tinker. I take the fender off my car. Sometimes it stays on jack stands for a couple weeks while I try to figure out how I can replace the bolt that I snapped the head off of. This is me. And so you can imagine this case with all of its facets. In some ways, it's like a giant puzzle. And deconstructing it and trying to understand that was a task that really I found too difficult to ignore. and then we'll go into a little bit of how it took over my life. So we know this story, right? December 7th of 2009, Susan disappears. Josh claims he's on the camping trip. Not too long after, talking about Josh and this idea that maybe the courts never saw the danger that he was. So let's jump back in time to the first 48 hours of this case, when you first encounter Josh Powell. In fact, let's go into that interrogation room where you had your first shot at really asking him the hard questions. What was that like?
It was just like any other interview, to be honest with you. I didn't really know a lot about Josh or the family, other than what I had collected over the course of that day and a half. So I wasn't sure how he was going to respond to my questions, and it's a really careful line. Like you have to be very, very careful, especially now looking back and later in the investigation learning. I mean, he's basically a sociopath, and so trying to keep him, I didn't have enough evidence to go and book him into jail as much as I would like, and I told Mr. Cox that I was going to put him in jail, and I had to later call him back and say, sorry, I can't. But I had to keep him there, and I had to keep him talking, and so he wouldn't get up on my personally.
How's your book coming?
It's a book? Didn't mention anything about a book.
You did.
It's coming along. It's coming along. Kind of it was tabled a little bit. I'm focusing on. I've had a private investigation agency for a couple of years now, Shield Balance, and one of the things that's kind of driving me with that is focusing on domestic abuse and the victims. And I believe that private investigators is a missing piece with these victims.
So what did you think?
I thought it was really interesting. I didn't know what to expect, so it was cool. It was cool to kind of get his backstory on things. And
How did it differ from what you may have anticipated?
I didn't know if there would be like more information that has come out, or kind of like an update on the story. That's kind of what I expected.
That's what I expected too.
I hoped that, of course, there would be some groundbreaking like stuff, but also just kind of understood that I probably would have heard about that in the news too. So.
That's an excellent point.
But no, it was really cool. It was interesting to see the investigator there. I know there's been some criticism on the investigation, and so it's
No, I
interesting.
felt like they were really engaged. It took such a huge effort, and I understand some of the criticisms as far as not taking him into custody, but I also understood that they realized they just didn't have enough.
The only criticism that I was interested in was some of the leads that weren't followed up on. When he
that's
was
a
like,
good point. Like the lead, the gas station.
Yeah, the gas station in particular, where he was like, nobody, he went and talked to her, and she was like, nobody came and talked to me.
Yeah.
So to me, that's kind of where I see the only really valid criticism.
I wonder if that came down to those boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of files,
Yep. Yeah.
It was
But
just
that seems like a
so
pretty big one to
much.
let.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And, there are multiple people working on it.
So,
What did you think of the crowd?
I was surprised. I was surprised by how many people there were. That was it. That was really interesting. I was like, it's probably it seemed like an interesting podcast. It seemed like it had obviously taken off. People had heard about it, but I didn't think there would be like that many people like packed in to see basically just the I don't know what you call the journalist,
Dave,
talking about like the podcast that you listened to, like, so.
When I talked, when he did?
Well, I just thought it was interesting, like, that people would be like that engrossed in it, but now I see why. You know, it's definitely more.
Now you see why.
I see. Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
What did you think when I first told you about the podcast?
I've always had an interest in the Susan Powell case, not like in a big way, but kind of in a passive way. So when I heard that it was about, you know, Susan Powell and that experience, I was like, oh, I definitely want to see like what information there is on it. So
one of the 40 podcasts I tell you to listen to every day. Ask you kindly, repeatedly.
Yeah. I get to most of them.
Eventually.
Especially
if I get you trapped in a car and I put on the speakers.
You start scrolling up, playing all of the ones
that you've missed.
Yeah.
I thought that they would fill in pieces that they didn't as much in the podcast, which they did, kind of. They did some. The video clips were interesting to see, especially the little boy. Because obviously with a podcast, you don't get that visual dynamic.
Yeah.
I thought that there would be more of that. I was hoping Jennifer would be on, like, in a big way. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
I will try not to be one of those annoying people that if I run into her, like, talk to her. Ask her about it. No, I wouldn't even recognize her.
Yeah.
My memory wouldn't go that far. I loved that it's bringing domestic violence more to the forefront, and hopefully, well, I'm sure it's affecting maybe both men and women who are in those situations to reconsider and try to find a way to get help.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how antiquated Utah's domestic violence laws and resources are.
Yeah.
You know, it's just it's crazy. One in three women.
It's not a surprise to me at all. I mean, talking to my female friends, I mean, that's including sexual assault too. And that alone,
Yeah.
I'm almost not surprised. I mean, I guess it depends what they count as assault, but anytime it's maybe unwelcome, I would think it's actually the majority.
Yeah.
I would think more women often than not. So maybe, you know, it's
prepaid tickets, credit cards. /credit cards. Sorry.
I know, that's what I always worry about. What was I gonna say? Well, that's maybe reported, or that could be extrapolated. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to be talked about, because that's the biggest thing with domestic violence is the shame, is the gaslighting. You feel like you're alone, and then they do cut you off from people, so you don't have that support system anymore, and all you have is a person telling you that you're the problem. Last thought is that it makes me, like, reflecting on things that I've been through and situations that I've been in, and even realizing, because I remember saying when I listened to the part where she worried that she was going to be murdered, I thought, how, at that point, how do you stay? And then it kind of hit me today that I stayed when I thought that that was a possibility, and that was even before I was in a position where that became a big potential. So that's all to say that I couldn't feel more gratitude to have found someone that not only doesn't abuse me, but doesn't just, like, hold the bar for, like, being normal level, but that you treat me with so much respect, so much love, so much I had a word, now it's feeling me, all the good things. I should have been treated like all along, and that I never have to be in a situation like that again.
I think that it's, I mean, to me, it's just how a woman should be treated. It's not.
Yeah.
That's just how. It's
I wish that was always the case for everyone.
It's boggling to me that that's not the norm. It boggles my mind. That this is something that is so prevalent.
Well, and I think someone mentioned, or he mentioned, from people have taught to him that in our culture, in the religious culture, it can feel very difficult to leave a bad situation because there's so much focus placed on making that marriage work no matter what.
Yeah.
And that no matter what can be very difficult and keep women in situations that they shouldn't be in. And as well as the social pressures or the religious pressures that you put on yourself of, if I leave this temple marriage, or if I leave, marriage period, what does that mean about me?
Yep. Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. It's difficult.